Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 28th July 2024, Sunday, and today we have some important articles that were covered in different newspapers. And these articles that we are going to discuss are relevant for the UPSC examination. So therefore, we'll try to discuss all these articles one by one. And before discussing them, let's try to solve one practice question for prelims that I have given to you yesterday. Now, the question is a very easy question. So the question is with respect to Myanmar's the countries with which Myanmar has been sharing its borders or boundary. Now, Myanmar in recent times is very often in news. Why? Because a military regime has taken over the democratically elected government in Myanmar. And there is also a civil war like situation has been going on in Myanmar. And because of that reason, Myanmar is very often and very constantly in news. So therefore, there are a set of countries given here, and with which of the following countries that they share borders with Myanmar, right? So if you look at China of course shares its borders with Myanmar. China shares its borders, and Thailand, immediate neighbor of Myanmar. So therefore Thailand also share its borders with Myanmar, and apart from that, Laos also share its borders with Myanmar. So therefore, the correct answer for this question is 1, 2, 4. C is the correct answer for this question. So you can see this is Myanmar. With Myanmar, India, especially the Northeast India, also share its borders with Myanmar on its western side. And apart from that, China is on the eastern and northeastern side of Myanmar. And Laos, with Laos it has been sharing its borders, and with Thailand also it has been sharing its borders, right? So you just go through the map that with which countries Myanmar has been sharing its borders, right? So the correct answer for this question is on option C, because Myanmar has been sharing its borders with China, Laos and Indonesia, but not with Cambodia. So you can see the location of Cambodia itself. And today we have another very important prelims practice question. The question is with respect to the Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. Recently, the central government announced that the birth anniversary of one prominent figure would be celebrated as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. And in fact, Ulgulan, one of the most famous tribal revolt, is also associated with this particular prominent figure, right? Ulgulan. So in fact, about Ulgulan, UPSC already asked a prelims question on this, right? So what is this Ulgulan movement? Who were associated with this Ulgulan movement was a prelims question, right? So the question is here, Janjatiya Gaurav Divas is celebrated to mark the birth anniversary of which of the following prominent figure? And the prominent figure which were given here in the options, he is also associated with the Ulgulan movement, Ulgulan tribal revolt during the colonial times. So therefore, try to answer this question in the comment section, and the correct answer I'll be providing you in the comment section, right? So today we have one important mains practice question. So this mains practice question, now yesterday we have discussed about India's ties with the Asian countries, because ASEAN is a 10-member grouping in East Asia and Southeast Asia, very close to India. And in fact, when we talk about ASEAN, India has Act East policy for a proactive engagement with both East Asian as well as Southeast Asian countries, right? So neighborhood first policy also applicable for all the Asian countries or most of the Asian countries. And we also wanted to further improve infrastructure and connectivity with all these Asian countries, because Asian countries are well known for their trade and commerce and even the manufacturing prowess. And because of that reason, India, through various policies such as Act East policy and neighborhood first policy, even we should also talk about the neighborhood first policy also, neighborhood first policy. And even there is also another policy, that is Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, and that particular policy is known as Saga policy. So through all these policies, India has been engaging with the Asian region. So the other thing that we should not forget is India's Indo-Pacific vision. India's Indo-Pacific vision is also we have discussed, and as part of India's Indo-Pacific vision, India always wanted free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific region, and India also believed that ASEAN can actually play a most important role in ensuring free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. Now the question is, Act East policy can only be successful if apprehensions of Asian nations are resolved. The question is essentially that saying that there are a lot of apprehension among these Asian countries. There are a lot of apprehensions among these Asian nations, and India's Act East policy can only be successful if apprehensions of these Asian nations can be resolved. If India is successful enough to resolve the apprehensions of these Asian countries, then our Act East policy would be successful. Now, in this context, the question has been asking us to discuss this with relevant examples. So, what should be the approach of this particular question? Right? So, we need to talk about the approach of this question. Now, firstly, you need to briefly discuss what is Act East policy. Briefly introduced what is Act East policy in the introduction, and then just highlight Asian countries' apprehensions about India and the need to resolve those apprehensions among the Asian countries about India to ensure the success of Act East policy, and then you can conclude the answer by giving a way forward. So that is the structure of the answer. So structure and approach of the answer is very, very important because it is like a foundation. It builds a strong and solid foundation, and based on that particular foundation you can further improve on presentation, add value to the existing content, and you can also score more and more marks in your answer. Right, so we'll proceed on to this answer. So in the introduction, as I have already discussed, that we need to briefly talk about the Act East policy of India. Now when we talk about the Act East policy of India, now Act East policy, apart from focusing on these Asian countries, now when we talk about Asian countries, there are 10 Asian countries in the East Asia and Southeast Asian regions. There are 10 Asian countries. Now India's Act East policy, apart from focusing on these 10 East Asian countries, and economic integration also include East Asian countries and even security cooperation also. Right, so it includes security cooperation, it includes economic integration, right? So it would also focuses on improving the ties with 10 Asian countries. In fact, when we talk about the association, association of Southeast Asian nations, it is a group that contributed to almost 16% of India's total GDP flows from 2010 to 2016. So you can understand the importance of Asian countries for India, because it is one of the most important source of foreign direct investment for India. And apart from being a most important destination of foreign direct investment, the Southeast Asian nations are very well known for their strong supply chain resilience. Right, so when India have a strong linkages with these Southeast Asian countries, that would actually benefit India achieve supply chain resilience, and it would also benefit India's growing manufacturing sector, especially India's Make in India program. However, notably, the two-way trade between India and all other Asian countries is actually tilted towards the Asian, and in fact there is a law, the existing trade gap that we have discussed earlier yesterday. So the trade gap has also been further widening. Right, so when we talk about the existing trade gap between India and Asian countries, now India has been importing more than what it has been exporting to Asian countries. But on the other hand, Asian countries have been importing less from India, but on the other hand they are exporting more. So therefore we can say that there is a widening trade gap between India and Asian countries. So that's why it is said that the two-way trade between India and Asian countries is tilted towards the Asian countries. Now we'll understand what are the apprehensions of these Asian countries, because in order to make sure that the Act East policy is a success, we need to address the apprehensions of these Asian countries, because these Asian countries have a certain apprehensions and we need to discuss those apprehensions. And the first important apprehension of these Asian countries is India's exclusion from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Right, so this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is a free trade agreement between 10 Asian countries and 6 countries in the region, 6 other countries in the region. So that includes Australia, that includes New Zealand and South Korea, Japan, and even China, right? So even India also. So that is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But recently India decided to not to become part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. In fact, this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is very, very important for all these Asian countries, because Asian countries wanted to integrate their economies with Indian economy. However, they also wanted that Indian economies should be integrated with the Asian economies. So they believe that India's inclusion in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership would give a further fillip to the trade and commerce. However, India is not become part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, because India has a certain concerns regarding the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And because of those concerns, India did not include itself in the RCEP. However, so since these Asian countries wanted to include India in the RCEP, they were clearly disappointed due to India's stance, right? So they also have some questions over India's reliability with respect to trade and commerce. So that is the one area. Now, why India did not join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership? Because with China, India has a huge trade gap, and China is also part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and India has also been looking for the ways to reduce this trade deficit with China. And because of the unfavorable trade balance with countries like China and all the countries in the Asian region, and India is also strongly determined to protect its domestic industry, specifically the dairy and steel industry. So since India wanted to protect its domestic industry, India did not become part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And apart from that, there is also lack of consensus among all these RCEP member countries over rules of origin, and all these factors have compelled India that we will not become part of the RCEP, and that clearly disappointed all these Asian countries which are looking to further strengthen trade and commerce and even connectivity linkages with India. Secondly, India is very often viewed as a regional net security provider, right? So Asian nations, if you look at the location of all these Asian nations, they have been in recent times facing the increasing threat and aggression of China, right? So they have been facing the regional security threats from Chinese aggressiveness, particularly in the South China Sea, right? Because China has been trying to dominate the South China Sea region, and because of that reason, Asian countries have been facing the regional security threats from China. However, the Southeast Asian nations, especially all these 10 Asian countries, have been wanting any other major country like India to play a larger role. They wanted India to play a larger role and a greater role in the Southeast Asian region and East Asian region, so that India could counterbalance Chinese aggression and Chinese assertiveness in the region. So thereby that could help these Asian countries to prevent the regional security threats from China. So this is also another aspect with respect to Asian engagement with India. And Chinese flagship program, that is Belt and Road Initiative. China has initiated the Belt and Road Initiative, and under the Belt and Road Initiative, China would develop infrastructure in number of countries, thereby further integrating the global economy. So it is an initiative that was launched by China to integrate global economy and to further expand trade for the benefit of China. However, despite these Asian countries having concerns with respect to China, because China has emerged as a regional security threat for these Asian countries, despite China became a regional security threat for these Asian nations, so most of the Asian countries are part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. They are actively collaborating with China in the Belt and Road Initiative, because this will further integrate their economies, the economies of Asian nations within the region and with the world also. But on the other hand, if you look at India's stance over the Belt and Road Initiative, India did not join the Belt and Road Initiative because of sovereign issues in the sense that this Belt and Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has been passing through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And in fact, India very often raised concerns about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has been passing through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. However, China did not pay any attention, any heed to India's concerns, and because of these sovereignty concerns, India decided to not to become part of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, all these Asian nations want India to provide for a greater physical connectivity within the region. So therefore, the Asian countries can actually integrate their economies with the Indian economy and rest of the economies in the region. And the other thing that we need to talk about is the existing inequality in the region, and that is also a key concern within the Asian grouping. Okay, so there is a huge inequality among the Asian nations. For example, we need to compare the development of Malaysia, Singapore with Indonesia, right? So we need to compare the development of Singapore, Malaysia with Cambodia and Laos. So there is a huge inequality that has been existing. Inequality in the sense that countries like Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, so they are very often known as less developed countries compared to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore within the Asian region. So therefore, India, because of prevailing inequalities within the Asian region, India would have to balance its relations at the bilateral level also. So all these are certain concerns with respect to India's engagement with the Asian countries. So we have discussed the first part of the answer, and the second part of the answer, the various measures that India can actually adopt. And these measures would help India overcome such apprehensions of these Asian nations. Now, what are the measures that India can actually take so that India's engagement with Asian countries would be more fruitful in the coming years? First and foremost, India and Asian countries should recognize security as a most important pillar of bilateral cooperation, because China has emerged as a regional security threat, not just for the Southeast Asian countries, East Asian countries, but even for India also. China emerged as a regional security threat. Now, in this backdrop, Asian countries, along with India's maritime, military, naval prowess, can actually organize military exercises. For example, Garuda military exercise that India conduct with Indonesia. Indonesia is part of Asian grouping. And apart from that, the cooperation should also extend to areas like blue economy in the South China Sea, where China has been claiming the rights over the South China Sea, and even the export of defense equipment to enhance the defense capabilities of these Asian countries against Chinese assertion or Chinese assertive behavior and aggressive behavior. And one such example is India recently exported BrahMos missile to Philippines. right? So therefore we need to explore the opportunities to export defense equipment so that we could enhance the defense capabilities of these Asian countries. And apart from that, the regional groupings such as quadrilateral security dialogue, so such things would actually help to deal with the Chinese aggressiveness in the region, because as we have discussed that within the Southeast Asian region, China has emerged as a regional security threat for all these Asian countries. So India's capabilities could be leveraged to provide security assistance, security help for these Asian countries. And we should not neglect the essential role that physical infrastructure or physical connectivity would actually play. And there is a trilateral highway network, so India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway. Now this particular trilateral highway is part of India's ambitious Act East policy. Why? Because India wanted to develop, improve physical connectivity with all these Southeast Asian countries, and this is the first step in that particular direction. Connectivity is very important if we wanted to integrate our economy with the Southeast Asian economies. So why? Because if we integrate Indian economy with the Southeast Asian economies, that would create more and more investments into our economy, and because of the supply chain resilience that these countries have achieved, that would also benefit India. India would also make rapid strides in the area of manufacturing and defense. So trilateral highway between India, Myanmar, Thailand, and even the development of Sitwe port in Myanmar and infrastructure projects in Myanmar. So all these projects are very, very important for further improving India's connectivity with the rest of the Southeast Asia. And alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative of China should also be developed or proposed by India. So therefore we need to provide a market and even connectivity with South Asia by BIMSTEC group. So BIMSTEC is a grouping in which Myanmar and Thailand are member countries. Both Myanmar and Thailand are part of the Asian grouping. So therefore we need to leverage this Bay of Bengal initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation to further revamp India's ties with the rest of the areas in the Southeast Asia. So what should be the way forward in this context? So we need to talk about the way forward also, right? So when we talk about the way forward between India and these Asian countries, so that we could further strengthen and we could further extend our cooperation with the Southeast Asian countries. The success of India's Act East policy, because Act East policy, it is a proactive engagement with the East Asia and Southeast Asia. The success of India's Act East policy will depend on connectivity projects in the Northeast region, right? So it will depend upon connectivity projects in India's Northeast region. Therefore India should actually expedite the connectivity projects like India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway, Kaladan multimodal transport project. So such projects are very, very important, and these projects or these connectivity projects should be immediately constructed, or they should be immediately fulfilled. So therefore, while pursuing the Act East policy, India must work its niche advantage, so especially in the areas of culture and civilization, because culture and civilization is one area where India have a lot of potential, especially with these countries. So therefore these cultural and civilizational linkages are dated from ancient times. They spread from Buddhism and Jainism. So all these aspects have to be looked into to further enhance India's ties with all these Southeast and East Asian countries, right? So with that way forward, you can conclude this answer. And next article that we are going to discuss is about the natural farming in India. In recent times, because of climate change and because of growing concerns with respect to food security, natural farming has been increasingly emphasized. Why? Because if you look at the traditional farming, in traditional farming we use chemical fertilizers, we use chemical pesticides, and we also flood the fields with water. And this has been over a period of time leading to the declining productivity of the soil. It has been leading to the salinity of the soils, and even use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides over a period of time leading to the soil pollution, water pollution, and even the food that is being produced from the modern agriculture is also creating a certain health problems also among the people. And in modern farming, input costs are very high, so this is also another problem with respect to the traditional we cannot say traditional farming or the conventional farming. So in order to overcome all these challenges, natural farming is increasingly emphasized in India. Okay, so it has been increasingly emphasized in India. Now in this article we will be talking about what are the major concerns with respect to yield, and what have been the findings on the ground, whether or natural farming, adoption of natural farming really leads to the declining yield of agriculture crops, right? So, and what is the actual scenario on the ground, and how did two studies on the yield potential of natural farming differ, and what happened when Sri Lanka decided to ban chemical fertilizer, right? So that has created a large scale food security crisis in Sri Lanka. If you go to 2021, Sri Lanka has faced an economic crisis, and major reason for the economic crisis in Sri Lanka was Sri Lanka adopted the organic farming or natural farming, and in order to encourage natural farming, the Sri Lankan government banned the import of fertilizer and pesticides, and that has created a large scale agriculture crisis in Sri Lanka, and that further contributed to the economic crisis, right? So we will understand all these aspects in this particular article, right? So what does the Union Budget 24-25 announced for natural farming, right? So what were the announcements in the recent annual budget that was introduced by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, right? So this particular budget has announced that in the next 2 years, around 1 crore farmers in the country will be initiated into natural farming. The government has started increasingly emphasizing on the natural farming. Government believe that natural farming is very important, so therefore we need to motivate and encourage more and more farmers to adopt the natural farming, and this natural farming will be supported by certification and even branding. For example, when farmers adopting natural farming, and the product or the produce from the natural farming would be different from the produce which is being produced using chemical fertilizer and pesticides. And in fact, there is also a lot of demand for the organic food, and because of that reason, so all the farmers who were engaged in the natural farming will be supported with a certification by the government and even branding of the agriculture produce. And with that, what happens, natural farming will be promoted, and along with the natural farming, it will lead to the increase in farm incomes, right? So it will increase farm incomes, or we can say that it will increase the farmers income, thereby leading to the doubling farmer income. And apart from that, it is also result in consumer health, and apart from that, we could also explore the export potential of these organic or natural farming produce, because when we export agriculture products into Europe, Japan, and even North American countries, very often Indian agriculture products were refused due to poor sanitary and phytosanitary standards, sanitary plus phytosanitary standards. So in order to overcome this particular challenge, this natural farming would be a potential alternative. And in fact, in this particular budget, So implementation will be done through this implementation of the above mentioned objective will be done through scientific institutions, and even gram panchayats will also take an active part in this, right? So certification and branding of the produce which is produced from the natural farming. So that would add to around 10,000 need-based bio-input resource centers, and these need-based bio-input centers will be established. So they would give further fillip to the natural farming in India. Right, so there is a specific mission for the natural farming, right? So there is also a national mission for natural farming, right? So we'll understand the basic objectives of the national mission for natural farming. And the government actually intends to motivate the farmers to adopt chemical free farming. Now if you look at the conventional farming, right, so majority of the farmers now have been dependent on conventional farming. So in order to increase yield, what farmers have been doing, farmers have been increasingly using chemical fertilizer, and they are also using chemical pesticides, also chemical pesticides and fertilizers that they have been using. Now chemical fertilizer and pesticides over a period of time leading to the declining soil fertility. Soil fertility is being declined, and declining soil fertility essentially means that less productivity of the soil, less productivity of the soil. Now less productivity, because of the less productivity of the soil, what farmers have been doing, farmers have been using more and more chemical fertilizer and pesticide, and that has been leading to the increasing input cost on the part of the farmers, right? So farmers have been facing all these problems. So in order to overcome these challenges, this natural farming will be promoted. So natural farming can be done by the individual farmers, and it can also be done by the collective group of farmers also, right? So therefore the farmers, to adopt chemical free farming under the national mission for natural farming, farmers would adopt chemical free farming and draw them towards adopting natural farming and organic farming. And in fact, the government believes that the success of the national mission of natural farming will require a behavioral changes on the part of the farmers. There is a need for change in the behavior of the farmers, and that is very, very important, right? So if there is no change in the behavior of the farmer, we cannot make farmers adopt the natural farming technique, and we can also not able to make farmers make a shift from the chemical based inputs to cow based and locally produced inputs. So therefore there are a lot of challenges that have to be addressed before making farmers adopt the natural farming. Now what is this natural farming? It is very important that we need to understand the basic definition of natural farming. Now when we talk about the natural farming, in the natural farming, it is a method of farming where no chemical fertilizer and pesticides are being used. In the conventional farming, farmers use indiscriminately both chemical fertilizer and pesticides, and since they cost very high, the input cost on the part of the farmers has been increasing substantially. But on the other hand, in the natural farming, farmers will not use chemical fertilizer and chemical pesticides. So therefore, the soil fertility can be retained. Soil fertility can be retained, and at the same time it would also substantially reduces input costs on the part of the farmers. There will be less input costs on the part of the farmers, and soil fertility can also be improved, or it can be retained through the natural farming. And apart from that, when we talk about the natural farming, it actually promotes the traditional indigenous practices which are free from the chemical fertilizer and pesticides. Because the traditional indigenous practices, they largely rely on farm biomass recycling, and even the biomass mulching. The agricultural products, they themselves used in the agri fields as a fertilizer. So that is known as biomass mulching and biomass recycling. So therefore we will not use any chemical fertilizer and pesticides in the agri fields, rather the agriculture products or if we have the livestock, the products that are being derived from the livestock will be integrated and they will be used as a natural fertilizer and pesticide, right? So for example, use of on farm cow dung and urine formulation, so all these things can be used in a natural farming method. So with this, what happens, the input cost can be reduced substantially. Input cost can be reduced substantially by using these methods in the natural farming. And in fact, when we practice natural farming, so it also emphasizes on improving the natural nutrient cycling and even increasing the organic matter in the soil. So it improves the organic matter in the soil, and that is very important. When organic matter is increased in the soil, that essentially means that the soil fertility can be retained and better productivity can be achieved. And when we talk about the benefits of this natural farming, there are a multitude of benefits from the natural farming. For example, restoration of soil fertility is one such benefit, and environmental health is also a very important, particularly at a time where climate change and environmental degradation has been taking place because of the anthropogenic activities. So this natural farming will help in restoration of the soil fertility and even the environmental health, and even it would help in mitigating or reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Now if you look at the agriculture sector is also one of the largest contributor of greenhouse gases such as methane into the atmosphere. However, through natural farming, when we use water resources in a more efficient manner, so that would reduce the greenhouse gas potential of agriculture as well. So therefore, it is very important that we must focus on the natural farming. However, natural farming or organic farming is not free from the challenges. There are number of challenges and concerns also. Now when we talk about the challenges of this natural farming, most of the farmers lack awareness. So farmers have adopted the chemical fertilizer and pesticides, and government has also been providing subsidies on fertilizer. So not pesticides, government has been providing subsidy on the fertilizer. So because of this reason, now farmers have been increasingly had a habit of using the fertilizer and pesticides to improve the productivity. However, it has been over a period of time leading to the decline in the soil fertility. However, so there is a need for increasing or enhancing awareness and even providing skills and training about the organic farming and natural farming is very important, and this aspect has to be dealt with at the grassroots level, or we can take a block as a unit, we can take a village as a unit, or even district as a unit to further improve awareness among the farmers, and even skill training should be provided. And another major challenge with respect to the natural farming is marketing and price determination. Even though the 24-25 budget has announced that 1 crore farmers will be encouraged to start natural farming, and certification branding will also be provided, or assistance can be provided in this regard by the government. However, there is a problem with respect to marketing and better prices for these produce which is being produced from the natural farming, right? So inability to obtain a premium price for the produce is also another disincentive on the part of the farmers. So it has been discouraging farmers. For example, there is a market, and in that particular market there is a proper certification, there is a proper branding, and when farmers produced different crops through organic farming, through natural farming, when they taken this particular produce to the markets, if they get better prices for their produce, so it would further encourage, it would incentivize them to engage in the natural farming. So this aspect has to be looked into. And even there is also a shortage of biomass and essential nutrients in the soil, so that is another factor. Because of even if we adopt natural farming as of now, because of the declined nature of fertility, soil fertility, the productivity levels would be remained low, and that would create the problem of food security. And a country with more than 140 crore population, so we cannot afford less productivity at this point of time. And apart from that, there is also a less infrastructure, and very few organic certification agencies were established by the government, and this is another challenge. And high input cost For instance, biofertilizers and organic manure, there is also a higher cost and most of the farmers cannot afford these fertilizers. Also, for example, with respect to chemical fertilizers, the government has been providing subsidy. So what if these input cost is very high where government will not provide any subsidies? So this is also another problem with respect to adoption of natural farming and organic farming. So therefore, in this respect, what should be the way forward? So experts have been suggesting that natural farming could be beneficial, right? So it could be beneficial, but it could be beneficial if it is adopted at the localized level. But India is a country with a huge population that amounts to around 140, more than 140 crore population. Adoption of natural farming on such a large scale may not be a successful model. That is what the experts have been suggesting with respect to the natural farming in India. So however, it is good that if India shifts towards natural farming, right? So you can imagine what Sri Lanka has gone through. So Sri Lankan government has decided that the agriculture will be shifted towards natural farming or organic farming. So in order to encourage natural farming and organic farming, what they have done, they banned import of fertilizer. So farmers lack fertilizer. So they just practice this organic farming or natural farming, and that has created shortage of agriculture produce, right? Because if farmers don't use fertilizer and pesticide, so of course the produce or the productivity would be lesser, and lesser productivity would essentially means that increasing inflation, increasing the agriculture products inflation, right? So that essentially resulted in economic crisis in Sri Lanka. So that sort of an economic crisis, in order to avert that, the experts have been suggesting that natural farming as a model would not be conducive for India, because food security is a major concern for India. And if we have adopted natural farming for cereals, which are mostly staples, so we shall be able to feed only around 1/3 of our India's population, right? So if we still adopt natural farming, we can only feed around 1/3 of our population. And even wheat and rice are staple foods, so even with respect to wheat and or rice, if we have adopted this natural farming, the productivity would be of course lesser. Okay, so growing these crops through natural farming, that could result in lower yields, and hence it's not advisable unless scientific studies are conducted on the yields. So unless you conduct the scientific studies, you cannot go ahead and start natural farming on a large scale, but because that would create large scale food security crisis, and even it could lead to the economic crisis. That is what the experts have been suggesting with respect to the natural farming in India. And next article is notified disasters, right? So what are these notified disasters? We'll understand. Recently the Finance Commission has denied to include heat wave as a notified disaster, or the category or criteria of notified disaster. Now, if it is heat wave, if it is included as part of the notified disaster, heat wave would receive financial assistance from the National Disaster Response Fund and even State Disaster Response Fund also. We'll understand the context of this particular article. The context is that recently Minister of State for a Union Ministry of Science and Technology, so a Union Minister of Science and Technology informed in the Lok Sabha that the 15th Finance Commission has declined to include heat waves in the list of notified disasters. If 15th Finance Commission included heat waves in the list of notified disasters, then heat waves would get a financial assistance and relief can be provided from the extreme weather events. So despite the unprecedented heat wave deaths that have been taking place in India in last year and this year also, the Finance Commission has ruled against the expanding this disaster list, including heat wave as part of the notified disaster. Now we will understand this, what exactly is a notified disaster, right? So in India we have a Disaster Management Act, because in 2004 we have faced one of the most disastrous tsunami. So after the tsunami incident in the year 2004 December, the government of India, the parliament has passed the Disaster Management Act of 2005. And this Disaster Management Act of 2005 defined a disaster as any catastrophic incident or a mishap, a calamity, or a grave occurrence. So that has been arising from natural or a man-made cause. And in fact, so that particular catastrophe or calamity even results in substantial loss of life, destruction of property, and even damage to the environment. And this is the specific definition of disaster that was defined by the Disaster Management Act of 2005. So as of now, only 12 disasters are classified as notified disasters. Now what are these 12 disasters which are classified as notified disasters and which are eligible to receive funding from the National Disaster Response Fund and State Disaster Response Fund? For example, cyclone is a notified disaster. Drought is a notified disaster, followed by earthquake, fire, flood, tsunami, hailstorm, landslide, avalanche, cloudburst, pest attack, frost, and cold wave. So all these 12 disasters are included in the notified disaster category. Now when any disaster is included in the notified disaster category, so it will be eligible for a National Disaster Response Fund and even the State Disaster Response Fund assistance. Okay, so that particular assistance is very important for the mitigation and adoption of those disasters, and at the same time improving the infrastructure, making it more and more resilient to these such disasters. Now what are these heat waves? Now when we talk about the heat waves, so as per the criteria, so that criteria was given by the Indian Meteorological Department to declare a heat wave are when any place's temperature exceeds 40 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Celsius in plains, and 37 degrees Celsius in coastal areas, and 30 degrees Celsius in the hilly areas, and that particular place is considered as a place which is affected by the heat wave according to the IMD criteria. So these temperature values are the thresholds which are being established by the Indian Meteorological Department for declaring heat waves in India. Right? So now what actually causes the heat wave? Because heat waves have been one of the major causes of death in India in 2024 and even 23 also, and due to climate change, the intensity and the frequency of these heat waves has been further increasing, along with the anthropogenic activities have been giving a further fillip to the heat wave like conditions. Right? So heat waves are generally the result of trapped air. So they are result of a trapped air. So you can see how a dome like a structure is formed, and heat a warm air is actually trapped at the ground level, and that would result in heat wave like conditions. So heat waves form when high pressure, high pressure in the sense that 3000 to 7600 meters strengthens, and it remains over a region for several days, or it could be several weeks also. Right? So whenever the high pressure system is formed above one particular region, so that force air downwards. Okay, so that would force the air downward because of the high pressure system that was formed at the top. So this actually force prevents air near the ground from rising. So since it has been coming down from the upper high pressure area, so that makes air at the ground to rise. So air at the ground, it cannot rise because of the force from the top. So the sinking air acts like a cap, and it traps the warm ground air in a one particular place, and that would result in heat wave like conditions. Even the high concentration of pressure at the higher levels of one particular region makes it difficult for other weather systems to move into the area. right? So which is why the heat wave can last for several days or even several weeks also, that these heat waves that we have been seen recently. And high pressure inhibits winds, and it also prevents clouds from entering that particular region. So therefore the heat wave conditions would prevail one region for several days, right? So the end result is a continued buildup of heat at the surface level, and people would also experience the negative consequences of such heat wave, and even it would lead to the heat stroke, and it would reduces the productivity of the workers, agricultural, especially agriculture and construction sector workers, and even it would lead to the death of people who are exposed to the intense heating during the daytime. And the urban heat island effect in the urban areas, in urban cities, because of the concrete jungles that we see in urban areas, so they are further aggravating the existing heat wave situation in India. So however, it is very important that heat wave should be included as part of the notified disaster, and at the district level there is a need for the heat wave action plan. So we need to identify the vulnerable districts based on the weather forecast, and based on that we need to create this heat wave plans, right? So we should have a heat wave plans that should be put in place, so in order to make sure that people are protected from this excess heat wave like conditions, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.